And welcome everybody and good evening to this presentation on Michael Leunig, a dear friend of mine for the last 40 years. He died just before Christmas and it was a great shock to me and especially to his partner, Nicola, and everybody. I wasn't really prepared for it. And so the first part of this talk I gave as an address at St. Paul's Cathedral in Melbourne in Flinders Street. It was a very moving occasion. And as you can imagine, being Michael Leunig, there were thousands of people, literally thousands of people. There was only standing room only, and all the seats in the cathedral were filled up with people who had admired Leunig most of their lives, and some of them were his personal friends. Many of his personal family members were there as well. So I begin with a with a quote from Meister Eckhart, the late medieval Germanic theologian and mystic. Can we turn that bell sound out, Neil, or not? It's going to keep going, is it?
I think it'll only go while people are joining on, David. I'm not sure about that, but I just plow on.
Okay. Meister Eckhart said, God created the world so that God could be born in the soul and the soul born in God. So I'll read that again. God created the world so that God could be born in the soul and the soul born in God. It seems to sum up what I've got to say tonight about Michael Leunig. In preparing these notes on Leunig's passing, I came across some remarkable words on death found in his interview with Roland Ashby's book, A Faith to Live By, which is a very, very fine book. I can recommend it. Michael quotes the psychoanalyst D.W. Winnicott, who said, "To die is like a very small hole. You have to get through it. You have to make yourself very small." And Michael responded to Winnicott by saying, "I like the idea of having to become simpler and smaller at the point of death." I'm sure he found the small hole at the moment of his own death. Leunig's work is of monumental significance, not only to Australia, but to the modern world. The metaphysical significance of his work escapes many of those who have smiled and laughed at his cartoons for the last 55 years. Neil, can you put the slide one up, please? Thanks. He attends to the spiritual life in our time, exploring the problems of finding and nurturing spirit in a materialistic age. Our society is in a dark night of the soul, seemingly devoid of spiritual concern, although at the same time Leunig sees the possibility of spiritual renewal and re-enchantment everywhere, especially in nature, outside us, and human nature within us. He makes much use of naivety or innocence as a way to reconnect with spirit and combat the corrosive effects of rationality. Starting almost from scratch, and accepting our secular disbelief as his first premise, Leunig builds a cosmology which respects the need of spirit and soul. He affirms the existence of something inside us, which he calls heart, that is capable of guiding our way. He sees great value in the interior or true self. Indeed, in a world where religious authorities are often disregarded, the only spiritual option available is to develop a mystical interiority and commune with the God within. Leunig says that faith today requires an inner life. It is the still small voice that guides us. I like that phrase very much, that faith today requires an inner life. I think when I was a little boy going to church, there wasn't an understanding even of what the inner life was, let alone that we could cultivate it and meet God there. Thanks. Thanks, Neil. The second slide. Thanks, Neil. One of my favourite Leunigs is a melancholic figure seated beside a gravestone under a dead tree, wilted flowers in hand, surrounded by tombstones marking the death of Santa Claus, supernatural figures, fairies, and God. Our lives normally move from the cradle to the grave, but Leunig depicts the spiritual journey in reverse. We begin in the graveyard of our intellectually enlightened world, and if we have a spiritual intuition and desire for life, we might move toward rebirth. Leunig says, and I quote, "I was born into a time and a family and a condition whereby I was taught and encouraged to believe in fairies and pixies and the invisible and the use of imagination. But as he grew up, he witnessed the death and demise of each of these imaginal figures." Sociologist Max Weber argued that the West has experienced Entzauberung der Welt, in German, meaning in English, the demagicalization of the world. Whatever God might mean to us now, his old form has been killed off. He can no longer be imagined as a man-like figure in the sky. Leunig's cartoons show all the wondrous things that have been killed off by our enlightenment. And now humanity is threatened by this disenchantment, leading to the sense that spiritual life is not merely some kind of fantasy activity that brightens things up, but is somehow integral to the functioning of life. That's why the tombstones include humanity, friends, and family. Integral to Leunig's work is the biblical saying from Proverbs, "Where there is no vision, the people perish." Now, this cartoon of the graveyard reminds us of T.S. Eliot's poem, The Wasteland, where we read, "What are the roots that clutch? What branches grow out of this stony rubbish? Son of man, you cannot say or guess, for you know only a heap of broken images where the sun beats and the dead tree gives no shelter." This is almost a poetic description of Leunig's cartoon. I asked him one day, was this a deliberate depiction of T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland? And he said, no, any similarity is coincidental. The mournful figure is seated amidst a heap of broken images where the sun beats and the dead tree gives no shelter. Thanks, Neil. Now, I've got a couple of quotes in the chat, which you can access by clicking on the chat button in the bottom of the screen. In philosophical mood, Leunig says, I think it's the natural condition of life that we are lost from God or beauty much of the time. Much of the time we struggle for our faith or our belief of something that comforts us. I've now learned to accept that. I once thought it was a failure of my religious impulse that I could not hang on to God for meaning. I felt it was a failing. Now I tend to see it as part of the natural condition, which must be stayed with. But it passes and we move in and out of it. If we could be in the divine state all the time, he says, it would be just too easy. In our spiritual journeys, we often begin in a psychological graveyard and move toward the possibility of new life. If we respond appropriately to the spiritual impulse, we can be lifted out of inertia and allowed to give birth to something sacred and life-giving in ourselves. The spiritual journey moves us from a condition of death to one of rebirth. As we go on the journey, we free ourselves from the grip of the ego, which limits our potential for experience and shuts us off from the world of spirit. By this act, the indwelling soul is born. A new self emerges from within, which demands our attention and allows us to reach beyond our egos. The soul houses our spiritual lives and serves as a temenos or precinct in which the divine life can be nurtured and developed. In Leunig, the duck symbolises the inner potential to overcome the deathly state and look toward a new world. Leunig took the duck as the leitmotif of his work. What is the duck saying or doing in his work? The duck in his cartoons represents the spirit, which animates life and gives meaning. In the foreground of this cartoon, a duck points its beak at the solitary figure in an accusatory way. Yeah, thanks. The duck is alarmed at the man's despondency, as if to say, wake up, why are you so depressed? The world is full of enchantment, even if you can't see it. It's as if Leunig's duck is saying, you are sitting in a graveyard of your own making. The world beyond human society is capable of renewing your life. In this spirit, the poet Rainer Maria Rilke wrote, and I quote, but for us existence is still enchanted, still in 100 places the source, a play of pure powers, touched only by those who kneel and wonder. Now, the us that Rilke refers to poets or artists, for the poet's existence is still enchanted. There is a spiritual and environmental hope in Rilke, as in Leunig, although society seems spiritually exhausted and has lost its way. The natural world can provide many possibilities of renewal. Thanks, Neil. Have we got the next slide up, please? This next slide I've called Kneeling Before a Duck, Reverence and Wonder. The call to emerge from the state of spiritual death comes from something unexpected, something linked to nature. For Leunig, the spirit which awakens and vivifies is natural, not supernatural. Enchantment is only available to those who kneel and wonder, said Rilke. Leunig doesn't worship ducks, of course. This is a metaphor for the necessity to kneel and wonder before the mystery that is spirit. Birds have symbolized spirit throughout the ages: the dove, the eagle, the hawk, and geese. So why not a duck? Thanks, Neil. Leunig's work seeks to revive public interest in prayer in the perspectives that open up to the secular self when it adopts a reverential relation to the world. His work is subversive in that it reverses the values of secular society. Leunig says, I ask the reader to bear with the absurdity of the image and to remember that the search for the sublime may sometimes have a ridiculous beginning. The kneeling man knows, as everybody does, that a proud and upright man does not and cannot talk with a duck. Spiritual renewal will not come through clever applications of the human will or reason. It will only come through doing something that the rational mind might see as absurd and would disagree with. Now, this cartoon is a cartoon of the Holy Fool. And in Leunig's memorial ceremony, funeral in Melbourne, there was this cartoon of the Holy Fool was put up as the single image that that the St. Paul's Cathedral saw as relevant to Leunig's life. This realization leads Leunig to affirm the tradition of the Holy Fool, the holiness of what seems foolish to the mind, that is. Much of his humour derives from the ironic disproportion between the values of the spirit and the values of the world. Thanks, Neil. The next one, please. Awakening spirit does not seem useful to the world, but leads to life. In an essay called Regressive Painting and the Holy Fool, Leunig refers to the fool as the archetypal personification of creativity's wellspring. And I'm reminded of 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 27. God chose what is foolish in the world to shame the world. And William Blake said, if the fool would persist in his folly, he would become wise. It's the wisdom of folly that Leunig is after in these cartoons, not the wisdom of society or the intellect, which would find the act of prayer and devotion to a duck a waste of valuable time. Too many of us today have lost the childlike sense of wonder and are suffering from too much social adjustment, which is a phrase Leunig used in our conversations. We used to meet for lunch for many, many, many years, and he would say that somebody is suffering from too much social adjustment. If we return to nature with adoration and respect, our humanity might be restored as we find a new ecological relationship with the natural world. This is not just about appreciating nature for its beauty or bounty, but appreciating it for its spiritual life. One turns to nature with spiritual interest because one recognises that it contains the same spiritual life that is found in ourselves. Leunig wrote, and I quote, "The duck can be seen as a symbol of the human spirit, and in wanting connection with his spirit, it's a symbolic picture of a man searching for his soul. The person cannot actually see this soul as he sees the duck in the picture, but he can feel its enormous impact on his life. Its outward manifestation can be disturbing and dramatic, and its inner presence is often wild and rebellious or elusive and difficult to grasp. But the person knows that from this inner dimension, with all its turmoil, comes his love and fear, his music, his art, and his very will to live." He also feels that a strong relationship with this inner world seems to lead to a good relationship with the world around him and a better life. Conversely, Leunig says, he feels that alienation from these qualities or loss of spirit seems to cause great misery and loneliness. The next slide, please. Yeah, this is one where he toys with the idea of the value of the soul plunged yesterday to its lowest level. Experts said nothing. One person invested in a smile. There were rumours about a small child who had flown over the city on a carpet of rose petals. A meteor plummeted and a few wishes were made. Certain things slid and crashed, but a cheer rose up and a dog barked playfully. A violin was heard. 2. A lot of Leunig's cartoons are about the soul or the spirit. When I gave this an earlier version of this talk in St Paul's Cathedral, people came up to me at the end and said that they hadn't realised that Leunig's work was so spiritual. And I kind of felt like saying, well, where have you been all this time? Of course his work is spiritual. He uses humour a lot to break into the spiritual life. And I'll say more about that in the moment. The soul may well be invisible, but it has real effects. Its gain brings peace of mind, meaning, receptivity, and fluidity of expression. Its loss brings pain and suffering, broken-heartedness, self-alienation, and despair. Its impact on us is so real that it seems stupid for us to suppose that it is unreal. And yet that is precisely the ignominy facing the soul. In our world-blinded age, it's often seen as fanciful, illusory, a mere poetic term pointing to nothing. Next slide, please, Neil. In this cartoon, one can see that the spirit has a natural affinity with the cosmos. It has its sight set on something higher than itself, the spirit of the world, the stars above. Humanity needs an intermediary to find its way back to a right relation with the cosmos. The human ego has lost this capacity to orientate itself to the guiding star, to see life as a trajectory toward an overarching vision. Leunig refers to the duck as the direction-finding duck. Although the ego has lost its way, the spirit can act as compass and guide if we find the courage to subordinate ourselves to its direction and pathway. Leunig emphasises that it is important to give value and meaning to whatever it is that presents itself to us as a carrier of a spirit. And he says, and I quote, The journeying man believes in the spiritual dimension, this inner life, and he knows that it can be strengthened by acknowledgement and by giving it a name. He may call it the human spirit, he may call it the soul, or he may call it God. The particular name is not so very important. The point is that he acknowledges the spiritual dimension. He would be a fool to ignore it. So powerful is its effects on his life, so joyous, so mysterious, so frightening. That's the end of that quote. The importance of objectifying the soul cannot be overstated, nor can the need to befriend it and treat it with respect. But Leunig suggests that we do not need to become too attached to the tags awarded to the soul. As he says, the particular name is not so very important. The late medieval mystic Eckhart felt the same way, and I quote from Eckhart, "It's no more possible to find a name for the soul than it is to find one for God, even though weighty tomes have been written about this. But insofar as she chooses to act, we give her a name," says Eckhart. Throughout the ages, the soul has been felt, as Eckhart makes clear, to be feminine. We have to call her something, but the term is not binding. What is binding is that we experience the soul as the mystery that awakens us to our true nature. To achieve this awakening, we need to activate love, devotion, and surrender, which was the name of an album I enjoyed when I was a younger man. Love, Devotion, and Surrender by Carlos Santana. We have to prepare to be amazed, to be shown new things, led into deeper mysteries. If the ego is receptive, the soul will take the lead. That is why Leunig refers to the duck as direction finding, because it discerns the pathway he has to follow. This is the secret to spiritual success and creative ability. For the artist, creativity does not come from the ego or any known source. It comes from the soul, the spirit, and in this case, the totemic animal or bird. The bird is the muse, the instigator of spiritual exploration, the symbol of that which is other than the ego. Perhaps foolishly in the eyes of the world, Leunig's anti-hero sets forth on a journey following the duck. In his writings and cartoons, Leunig refers to the direction-finding duck because it discerns the way out of spiritual darkness into light. Following the duck can lead to a new dawn, whereas if we stick with the mundane perspective, we would be back in the graveyard among the tombstones. The duck, or we might say the spirit, keeps us oriented to a larger perspective, to one outside the gloom of the modern condition. The next cartoon. Thanks, Neil. Now, when Leunig was a boy, he heard someone speak of a guardian angel, but he misheard this reference and thought they said gargling angel. So here is his gargling angel watching over the person who is following the duck. Like any creative artist setting out to rework the religious project for a secular age, Leunig runs a double risk, upsetting the secular by his religiousness and upsetting the religious by his lightness of touch. Leunig is introducing spiritual life into a committedly secular society like Australia. This means he has to tread carefully. As a humorist, he needs his audience to laugh with him, not at him. The image of the duck is humble, disarming, everyday. If Leunig had arrived at a more elevated or conventional religious symbol, such as a god or an angel or a supernatural force, his audience would have laughed at him, rejecting his overtures to the spiritual. Without humour, the secular audience might have dismissed his spirituality as pretentious or un-Australian as soon as it drifted into metaphysical speculation or evangelism. As long as he can get the audience to laugh with him, it will most likely not reject him as a God botherer or someone who suffers from what Richard Dawkins calls a God delusion. In Leunig's cosmology, humour plays a major role in challenging and breaking down the resistances of secular rationality. In one of his songs, Leonard Cohen sang, "There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in." Now, Leunig explores the potentials of humour to crack open the secular self and expose it to the sacred. He described his cartoons as public prayers and was conscious of doing this in the context of a spirit of the times constricted by what he calls fashion anxiety. Fashion anxiety constricted the role that prayer might have in the newspapers, for instance. So Leunig is engaged in a remarkable experiment, introducing spiritual life into a secular newspaper like the Melbourne Age, and then after a while the Sydney Morning Herald ran his cartoons as well, as did the West Australian in Perth. Hence, the symbol of the duck was useful because it's so humble, disarming, every day. But as long as the artist can get the audience to laugh with him, he's caught them in his imaginative web. The audience is then spiritual, in inverted commas, without even realising it. This is Leunig's great achievement, seems to me, to draw a non-religious country like Australia into an artistic adventure, which is religious, perhaps with a small r, religious with a small r. Leunig is correct to emphasise in the passages above that it's humility before the numinosity of nature that can bring healing and transformation. The ego is necessarily displaced by this intimate dialogue with the soul. The fact that he grasps the beauty and mystery of the displacement of ego means that he will not feel humiliated by the spiritual stance. Quite often, people do not see the value of humility. And when this is the case, it forces life to humiliate us. I've often been aware of the similarity between the words humility and humiliate. If we do not break the ego by an attitude of prayerful reflection, it will be broken involuntarily. In other words, we will be humiliated. The task is to lower the ego in the face of a great mystery. As we read in Matthew, anyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and anyone who humbles himself will be exalted. Leunig seems to grasp this ancient religious truth instinctively, but it seems that his own personality was broken just prior to the imaginative encounter with the direction-finding duck. The next cartoon, please, Neil. There is a phase of strong creativity in Leunig, which seems to coincide with a period of personal anguish and brokenness. This cartoon begins with the words, "When the heart is cut or cracked or broken, do not clutch it, let the wound lie open. Let the wind from the good old sea blow in to bathe the wound with salt and let it sting. Let a stray dog lick it. Let a bird lean in the hole and sing a simple song like a tiny bell and let it ring." This is one of the most moving cartoons which reflects his faith in nature and the natural resources of the world to heal our wounds and fix our problems. He told me that he was crying when he penned this cartoon, and he was in the midst of a very raw and heartfelt period of pain and suffering. He said he felt that the soul heals itself in the presence of nature, and this cartoon expresses the need to allow our wounds to heal themselves, and we must not force the process of healing. Can I have the next cartoon, please, Neil? This cartoon comes with a beautiful prayer. God help us. With great skill and energy, we have ignored the state of the human heart. With politics and economics, we have denied the heart's needs. With eloquence, wit, and reason, we have belittled the heart's wisdom. With sophistication and style, with science and technology, we have drowned out the voice of the soul, the primitive voice, the innocent voice, the truth. We cannot hear our heart's truth, and thus we have betrayed and belittled ourselves and pledged madness to our children. With skill and pride, we have made for ourselves an unhappy society. God be with us. Amen. This is one of the first cartoons that he presented for the Sunday Age. The Age newspaper used to only be on weekdays and Saturdays, but then there was a time when it began the Sunday Age, and it asked Michael to do some special cartoons for the Sunday Age. And I don't think the Sunday Age expected quite what Michael had in mind, namely cartoons which are overtly religious and appeal to God and end with the word Amen. So, with great skill and energy, we have ignored the state of the human heart. The heart, he says, is crying for help. He indicates that patience and tolerance are needed in order to attend to the heart. It's not going to speak to us in our language, but it will use its own. Here he points to the necessity of suffering to revive the heart plant. It thrives on the tears that are shed in its honour, in the realization of what we have lost. With eloquence, wit, and reason, we have belittled the heart's wisdom. We have drowned out the voice of the soul, the primitive voice, the innocent voice, the truth. And he asks God to be with us as we try to repair the damage we have caused the soul, the self, and society. Now, the Sunday Age prayers were conventional in some ways. They appealed to God at the start and end with the word Amen. Leunig admitted that his spiritual work involved risk. And he says, I opened my heart to derision, he wrote in his preface to a book called When I Talk to You, subtitled A Cartoonist Talks to God. The creation of my prayers has involved feelings of considerable vulnerability, he says, because I understood that such things are readily and gladly misunderstood. They are my fumbling experiments, and they mostly derive from a situation of deep personal struggle, which was difficult, wonderful, and radical. Leunig's work points to the need for an ongoing dialogue between ego and soul. The ego must renounce its control over the personality in order to commence a dialogue with the soul. It must risk appearing foolish to others and even to itself by holding conversations with invisible figures and taking the soul seriously. As in the work of St. John of the Cross and his dark night of the soul, its suffering and brokenness that acts as a prelude to spiritual awakening. We have to be reduced in order to be recast in a new mold, turned into a new person. Suffering is necessary and not something that can be skipped or fast forwarded by a person eager to discover the boons of spirituality without the pain. For reasons which only God can discern, the human ego has to be broken so that the soul can be contacted and released. This process is as painful as birth, and through suffering, one is in fact giving birth to one's deeper self. It was often said that Leunig's work was depressing. I know what people mean by that, but I don't think it was really depressing. It was just facing the need for pain, anguish, and suffering, and how those three things, pain, anguish, and suffering, can bring forth the reality of soul. Next cartoon, please, Neil. As Leunig's journey unfolded, he felt the need to use words as well as images to convey his quest. More than words, his writings are prayers or sacred poems addressed to an unknown God who heals our wounds and makes us whole. This drawing and poem signals the new theme of rebirth in his work. A small, shy truth arrives and is born. If we admit that we are spiritually dead, the possibility of rebirth is already present within us. Importantly, a precious truth arrives and is born within our emptiness. The God-shaped hole in our lives is precisely where God is born. The emptiness simply has to be recognized before it's suddenly filled with the possibility of new life. Yet this is a miracle of psychological and spiritual experience, but it's a small miracle that cannot be glamorized or idealized. It can only be experienced in what the poet W.B. Yeats called the foul road, rag and bone shop of the heart. Next cartoon, please, Neil. This suffering is a difficult truth, and it's hard to explain to those who have not yet felt the demands of an other will, a voice which is not their voice, an authority not their authority. As St. Paul wrote in his letters to the Galatians, I live, yet not I, but Christ lives within me. It's this not I aspect which needs to be understood before spirituality can be born in our souls. There is something alien within the self which wants to break out, and I take this to be the original imprint of God in creation. Our true self, as Thomas Merton calls it, the God within, according to Eckhart. It's a blessing, but a mixed blessing because it brings disturbance and difficulty. At first, we do not know how to accommodate it, and we are unsure of ourselves in this altered situation. As we might say in colloquial English, it takes some getting used to, because we thought we were of one piece, integrated, whole, and suddenly a new experience takes place and we become two persons, not one, which is a quote from Friedrich Nietzsche in Thus Spake Zarathustra. Can I have the next cartoon, please? The cartoons are missing, are they?
The cartoon's there, David.
Oh, what is it?
Let us pray for wisdom.
I can't see it.
Oh, well, it's
Okay. And can we have the next cartoon then, please?
you see that?
No. What does it say?
So you believe? In this, do you? Joel, just watch.
Oh, right. We're right up to there. Okay. Oh, we're right up to there. Yes, this cartoon is one that I used a lot in my courses on spirituality at La Trobe University. The university students loved spirituality, although the staff didn't like it. But nevertheless, I ran against the grain and offered a whole course on spirituality. One year it was the most popular course in the whole of humanities. And in my experience, students respond to the humour and irony of his work. His humour can make the big religious topics more accessible and immediate. Topics such as sacrifice, humility, trust, prayer, and worship come alive. Young people are often profoundly alienated from traditional religious language, but Leunig finds a language that they can readily accept. So what's up there now? Is it see, watch this?
Can you hear me, David?
Yes, I can, but I can't see you.
It's the so you believe in this, do you? Well, just watch.
Okay, read it out, can you?
So you believe in this, do you? Well, just watch. You see? Completely hollow. Brilliant.
Yes, this cartoon is constantly making people aware that the spiritual journey is lonely, and very few people consciously explore this path to inner transformation and re-enchantment. And you'll see in the last slide, the last portion of that cartoon, that although some smart aleck has come up from behind the crowd and blown down the icon that he was worshipping, the figure is engaged in reconstructing that icon and giving it a new shape with sticky tape or whatever it is that's holding it together. Leunig is very conscious of his own loneliness as a spiritual person. I suppose that's why he liked me so much, because he could recognize me as also a spiritual person. That's what kept our Friday lunches alive for many, many years. He says in Roland Ashby's book, A Faith to Live by the way, Neil, the whole thing is gone now. I can't see anybody or anything. I don't know why. Anyway, quote, Leunig says, and I quote, "There's the personal longing for the transcendent But there's also the longing for the recognition of the transcendent, that it matters to society, that it matters to my fellow creatures, that we can talk of it, that we can allow for it and know of it. To live in a non-believing world is a particular anguish, and I don't know whether it's a condition of my aging. Sometimes it becomes unbearable to be surrounded by non-believers, people who flagrantly proclaim a kind of non-belief in any value. It's that seeming inability to ask, is there nothing higher, that I find disturbing. Sometimes you can find yourself amongst people who feel nothing higher, and this is a very particular kind of loneliness which becomes unbearable at times, particularly, he says, if you work in journalism, as he did. The Zoom has gone off my screen, Neil. Can it be replaced somehow?
David, it's Kate here. I think if you probably have a Zoom icon at the bottom of your screen. If you just click on that, it should come back. It's still there. We're seeing the slides.
Oh, you are. Okay. Yes, now I can see them. Okay. Well, this is puzzling. Okay. Hold on a tick. I've lost my script now. But look, let me just talk you through the last bit of it. I see Leunig as an extraordinary artist because he is the only artist I know who made spirituality a popular subject. There's no other artist who I can name who made spirituality a popular subject. And yet, as I said before, some people looked at his work and laughed at it, and didn't even recognize that it was a spiritual art that he was doing. Neil, can we have the next slide, please? Yeah, thanks. Now here we've got another depiction of the loneliness that Leunig felt in his life. There's a character on a bicycle going left lane, truth and beauty, and everybody else is in motor vehicles. And the bicycle often appears in Leunig's work as a symbol of self-motivated reflection. Can we have the next slide, please? Yes. Now here we have his imagination that white people once had sacred sites in a dream time. All this was eventually subdivided. such a subdivision is now called privacy. Each one clings to their bit of reality. This is where the human spirit lives, in such solitary confinement that it becomes individuality, and individuality becomes a secret which is carried to the grave. And again, the words, "I'm so lonely," come up again. Leunig was very lonely. He was an enigma, because when we lunched together, he was instantly recognised by everybody in the restaurant. They would say, "Oh, there's Michael Leunig," and yet, in the midst of that fame, he felt terribly, terribly lonely, and just hoped that some people saw reality the way he saw it. So can we have the next slide, please? Yeah. This is a slide that Richard Raw said was his favourite Leunig cartoon. It's called The Garden Gate, and you have to walk along it and open it up into the mystery that is night, full of stars, and the crescent moon, which is often a favourite of Leunig's, the crescent moon. And the idea is that to enter the spiritual life is partly to take a plunge into and through the garden gate into that same starry firmament which we saw before on the character who was riding a bicycle. Next one, please. My students love this one because let it go, let it out, let it all unravel, let it free, and it can be a path on which to travel. And Leunig here is imagining that the inner life is like a toilet roll in the head, and you walk on it, and it reveals itself to you as you walk across it. And there's his favourite symbol, the little crescent moon up in the sky. Let it go, let it out, let it all unravel. The next cartoon, please. This is about the spiritual journey. Go to the end of the path until you get to the gate. Often his cartoons play on each other. So there's somebody who's at the garden gate again. Go through the gate and head straight out towards the horizon. Keep going towards the horizon. Sit down and have a rest every now and again. But keep on going. Just keep on with it. Keep on going as far as you can. That's how you get there. Now, I'll see if I can get my notes back. I've just had the good fortune here that my conclusion has just appeared. So if you excuse me a minute, I'll just read my conclusion, which disappeared off the face of my computer for a while. The artistic world of Michael Leunig is one which has witnessed the death of God, as we find in society at large, and as we saw in that opening cartoon. But his is a world in which the spiritual impulse has become reactivated and calls for acknowledgement. God may have died to contemporary culture, but Leunig maps a process by which God is reborn in the soul.
Yes.
Which was the words of Meister Eckhart. The theme of much of his work is rebirth and the personal journey we have to undertake to bring God to life again. The so-called death of God is for this artist a prelude to a far more potent and life-changing encounter with the living God. God dies, in inverted commas, as an external figure of tradition and re-emerges in mysterious form as the deeper dimension of one's own being. It's almost as if this is the real meaning of God in our time. It sets the scene for a close encounter. Perhaps God had to die to our external gaze so he could be reborn in this extraordinarily intimate way. What a strange death it is to give rise to such a glorious rebirth. By the way, this is the essence of Jung's message as well. Jung's psychology is, I of course, as someone who's written a lot on Jung, talked to Leunig a lot about Jung, and he read him, and he influenced by Jung in his work. Leunig charts a process of rebirth which seems esoteric and hidden in today's world. Most of the public chatter and intellectual discourse is about the assumed death of God and the consequences of living in a secular world in which religion and belief seem to play ever diminishing roles. But this is merely the superficial story of our time. At the same time as God and religion disappear on the public stage, they are making a quiet but significant comeback on the personal stage. This makes for a peculiar fact of our time. Religion is disappearing as a social force, but returning as a psychological, inward force. It's almost as if there is a return of the repressed, and yet this is not understood by the journalists, social analysts of our time. I think Hugh Mackay understands this in his social analysis of Australia, but he's pretty much running a one-horse race. It would seem that only artists, poets, psychotherapists and counsellors are aware of this contrary movement in society. The movement could be called the re-sacralisation or the de-secularisation of society. Now, Leunig carries out the repair and transformation of our experience in almost sublime isolation. Hardly anyone comments on the anomaly of having such a public and loved figure trace such a private dimension of our experience. But surely no one in the intellectual world dares to comment about the fact that Leunig remains a popular figure because he is tracing the most private of experiences, the rebirth of God in the soul. Even those who love his work and express this love in their near devotion to his cartoons are unaware that they are bearing witness to the rebirth of God in his work. No one has put this anomaly into words, as far as I know. People are not aware why they love his work. He is making an unconscious process in Australian society conscious. Let me say that again. He is making an unconscious process in Australian society conscious. No one in the journalistic field dares to comment on Leunig's breathtaking project, The Redemption of God in a Time of No God. His long-standing attempt to repair the sacred canopy is conducted without institutional support or social assistance. This work is a countercultural activity. It's carried out against the grain of fashion, against the tastes of intellectuals, and even at times against the grain of the Christian churches. Why is this the case? Well, the churches have not absorbed the extent to which God is dead in society. Religion engages in business as usual every Sunday, celebrating the Gospels and the Jesus story as if history had never happened and God had never died. To recover God after the death of God is a prophetic act, not a priestly one. It involves poetry and intuition, not theology and reason. The priest has his or her theological universe to draw on and is able to rely on doctrinal precepts to direct the search for God. But the prophet, naked in the world and often bruised by experience, cannot rely on the existing structures of religion, but must search for new ways to articulate the reality of God and our experience of the sacred. The prophet needs to find a new angle, a new approach, and he or she cannot afford to be too conventional in language or imagery. Otherwise, people will turn off and say the work is too churchy. There must be evidence in the prophet's work that God has died for the majority of people and that he or she is struggling to find a new language to articulate ancient truths. The prophetic is often forced to become more traditional as the search proceeds, as the personal spirituality draws on religious truths for its resources. This will annoy the secular audience and the fashionable people for whom the old religious dispensation has become junk, senseless, and unintelligible. But the new work has to be quirky enough to reach the modern world, and thus the traditionally religious can find it perhaps too offbeat to express the world of faith that they know and love. Leunig's real audience is not the fully secular or the devoutly religious, but those in between, the countless numbers who have lost touch with religious traditions but cannot identify themselves with the secular world either. They are those for whom the old God is dead, but who look to the future and say God can become alive again in the human heart.